Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome to the stage Sinéad Cusack, Jeremy Irons, Eileen Atkins, and Patrick Kennedy. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Josephine Hart Poetry Foundation. I'm Siobhan Wilder and I'm director of the foundation. As many of you will know, the Josephine Hart Poetry Hour, matching leading actors to programmes of the greatest verse in English, has been running for almost 30 years now and was established here in the British Library in January 2004, and they continue in her memory. Our readers for this evening, devoted to W.H. Auden, one of the finest and most influential of 20th century poets, are, as you've seen, Sinéad Cusack, a stalwart of the Royal Shakespeare Company who's worked extensively in theatre, TV and film, has a new series on BBC Two, Mother, Father, Son, coming up shortly. It's also Sinead's birthday tonight, and she's... And we're very grateful to her for choosing to spend the evening with us, as we are to Jeremy. Jeremy Irons, who needs no introduction, Oscar winner, who has a great link going back 30 years with Josephine Hart and the Poetry Hour to that wonderful film Damage, which he made with Louis Malle. And also he is the most respected and admired reader of T.S. Eliot, and we are very, very happy to have him reading Auden for us this evening. Eileen Atkins, Dame Eileen Atkins, one of our finest actors, just finished a run in The Height of the Storm at the Wyndhams and will play it in New York at the end of the year. And she is also, of course, well known for Doc Martin and heads off after this to do the final 8-part series. And Patrick Kennedy, also a star of stage, TV and film, perhaps best known for Bleak House, Atonement, Warhorse, Boardwalk Empire, and most recently, Mrs. Wilson and Peterloo on the BBC. So I will just read you a few words from Josephine Hart now about her reasons for starting the Poetry Hour. In the speech that she wrote for the opening night of the Josephine Hart Poetry Week at the Donmar, she said the basic purpose of the Poetry Hour was that a public performance of the great poetry of the dead poets, read by great actors, should become the norm in London. And indeed it has. The philosophy behind her poetry hours was simply expressed in 3 parts. First, the life of the poet. Josephine Hart agreed with T.S. Eliot that we understand the work better if we understand something of the poet's life. As Eliot said, the poet always writes out of his personal life, in his finest work out of its tragedy, whatever it may be, remorse, lost love, or loneliness. Therefore, Josephine Hart's introductions to the poets are always an important part of these evenings. Second, the poets read aloud. According to Josephine Hart, poetry startles us into a more full sense of life. It is a trinity of sound, sense, and sensibility. And what Robert Frost called the sound of sense will be lost unless we hear it, and the sense of sound. Language caught alive. The gold in the ore is the sound. Seamus Heaney, as an undergraduate at Queen's, found that on hearing Eliot's 4 quartets read by the actor Robert Speight, what had been perplexing when sight read from meaning only was hypnotic when read aloud. Yeats, in his 70s, said he'd spent his life clearing out of poetry every phrase written for the eye alone and bringing all back to syntax that is for the ear alone. Auden put it more bluntly. No poem which is not better heard than read is good poetry. And third, poetry read by great actors. Again, Josephine Hart agrees with T.S. Eliot that poetry should be read to us by skilled readers, the feeling for syllable and rhythm penetrating far below the conscious level of thought and feeling, invigorating every word. Our readers this evening are going to do that for you now. Thank you.
We hope.
So this is Josephine's introduction. One Sunday afternoon in March 1922, a school friend casually asked me if I wrote poetry. I, who had never written a line or even read one for pleasure, decided at that moment that poetry was my vocation. Just like that. And therein lies the mystery of Auden. The critic, John Bailey, writes that he turned out to be a brilliant poet, which does not alter the arbitrariness of his decision to become one. Art and will conjoined. Fame and success followed. Poems 1930, published when he was 27 by Faber and Faber, made his name immediately. Indeed, in the history of literature, only Byron became famous more quickly. Two further collections, The Orators and Look Stranger, led to 2 gold medals for poetry. During his lifetime as a poet, playwright, and essayist, W.H. Auden garnered awards and honors on both sides of the Atlantic. In America, he won the Gold Medal for Poetry, the National Book Award, and the Pulitzer Prize. In 1956, he was elected Professor of Poetry at Oxford University. Poetry, he once wrote, is memorable speech. His poems contain some of the most succinct, elegant, and unforgettable lines in literature. They sear themselves into the consciousness. A poetic inquisitor, he drills deep in the deserts of the heart. His poems throw down a moral challenge. Can we win truth out of time? It is this passion for truth that gives Auden's poetry its moral tone. He'd read natural sciences at Oxford before switching to English, and his use of language is forensic and driven by the same purpose as the scientist, the revelation of truth, however uncomfortable. His stated purpose could not be clearer. Insofar as poetry or any of the arts can be said to have an ulterior purpose, it is, by telling the truth, to disenchant and disintoxicate. His loathing for what he called the folded lie, the romantic lie in the mind, gives added potency to Seamus Heaney's description of Auden as magnificently sane. He said, "Nothing I wrote in the 30s saved one Jew from Auschwitz." His epitaph for the unknown soldier is provocative. To save your world, you asked this man to die. Would this man, could he see you now, ask why? In Musée des Beaux-Arts, the ship in Bruegel's painting Icarus witnesses the protagonist's fall from the sky. And we see the white legs disappearing into the green water. Yet the ship sailed calmly on. As Auden reminds us, the dreadful martyrdom must run its course. Dreadfulness is consistent, whether we are eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. Perhaps walking down Bristol Street, where Auden defies us to conquer time, as they do in As I Walked Out One Evening. He reminds us that in headaches and in worry, vaguely, life leaks away. Terrifying. Philip Larkin noted that Auden's poetry was blaming and warning. And in the poem September the 1st, 1939, it couldn't be clearer. The poem is blunt. Those to whom evil is done do evil in return. The Unknown Citizen, again a late 30s poem, an Orwellian vision, which absolutely resonates today as more and more private information is gathered by the state. Then there's The Song of the Devil. It's fun, though not quite pure fun. See if you can recognize yourselves within the lines. And then we have Miss G. Well, she's a surprise. Auden was fascinated by psychiatry. He once told Christopher Isherwood, who'd been suffering from a sore throat, Nonsense, you've been telling lies. This poem is funny, cruel, and perhaps overly influenced by Freud. However, once you meet Miss Edith G., you'll never forget her. Private faces in public places are wiser and kinder than public faces in private places. And the poem Who's Who tells us just that. Completely different in tone, once again, is Lullaby, a beautiful lyric about the fleeting nature of love. And finally, listen out for the marvelous last line in Night Mail. It's a technically brilliant poem, and you can sense the velocity. And it was written for a BBC documentary in 1936. But first, it's Musée des Beaux-Arts.
About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. How, when the aged are reverently, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there always must be children who did not specially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course, anyhow, in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturer's horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The ploughman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing. A boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to, and sailed calmly on.
As I walked out one evening, 1937. As I walked out one evening, walking down Bristol Street, the crowds upon the pavement were fields of harvest wheat. And down by the brimming river, I heard a lover sing under an arch of the railway, "Love has no ending. I'll love you, dear, I'll love you, till China and Africa meet. And the river jumps over the mountain, and the salmon sing in the street. I'll love you till the ocean is folded and hung up dry, and the 7 stars go squawking like geese about the sky. The years shall run like rabbits, for in my arms I hold the flower of the ages and the first love of the world." But all the clocks in the city began to whir and chime. Oh, let not time deceive you. You cannot conquer time. In the burrows of the nightmare, where justice naked is, time watches from the shadow and coughs when you would kiss. In headaches and in worry, vaguely life leaks away, and time will have his fancy tomorrow or today. Into many a green valley drifts the appalling snow. Time breaks the threaded dances and the diver's brilliant bow. Oh, plunge your hands in water, plunge them in up to the wrist. Stare, stare in the basin and wonder what you've missed. The glacier knocks in the cupboard, the desert sighs in the bed, and the crack in the teacup opens a lane to the land of the dead. Where the beggars raffle the banknotes, and the giant is enchanting to Jack, and the lily-white boy is a roarer, and Jill goes down on her back. Oh, look, look in the mirror, oh, look in your distress. Life remains a blessing, although you cannot bless. Oh, stand, stand at the window as the tears scald and start. You shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. It was late, late in the evening. The lovers, they were gone. The clocks had ceased their chiming, and the deep river ran on.
September the 1st, 1939. I sit in one of the dives on 52nd Street, uncertain and afraid, as the clever hopes expire of a low, dishonest decade. Waves of anger and fear circulate over the bright and darkened lands of the earth, obsessing our private lives. The unmentionable odor of death offends the September night. Accurate scholarship can unearth the whole offense from Luther until now that has driven a culture mad, find what occurred at Linz, what huge imago made a psychopathic god. I and the public know what all school children learn. Those to whom evil is done do evil in return. Exiled Thucydides knew all that a speech can say about democracy and what dictators do, the elderly rubbish they talk to an apathetic grave. Analyzed all in his book, The Enlightenment Driven Away, the habit-forming pain, mismanagement, and grief. We must suffer them all again. Into this neutral air where blind skyscrapers use their full height to proclaim the strength of collective man, each language pours its vain competitive excuse. But who can live for long in an euphoric dream? Out of the mirror they stare, imperialism's face and the international wrong, faces along the bar, cling to their average day. The lights must never go out. The music must always play. All the conventions conspire to make this fort assume the furniture of home, lest we should see where we are, lost in a haunted wood, children afraid of the night, who have never been happy or good. The windiest militant trash important persons shout is not so crude as our wish. What Mad Nijinsky wrote about Diaghilev is true of the normal heart. For the error bred in the bone of each woman and each man craves what it cannot have, not universal love, but to be loved alone. From the conservative dark into the ethical life, the dense commuters come, repeating their morning vow. I will be true to the wife. I'll concentrate more on my work. And helpless governors wake to resume their compulsory game. Who can release them now? Who can reach the deaf? Who can speak for the dumb? All I have is a voice to undo the folded lie, the romantic lie in the brain of the sensual man in the street, the lie of authority whose buildings grope the sky. There is no such thing as the state, and no one exists alone. Hunger allows no choice to the citizen or the police. We must love one another or die. Defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies. Yet, dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out whenever the just exchange their messages. May I, composed like them of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming light.
The Unknown Citizen, 1939. He was found by the Bureau of Statistics to be one against whom there was no official complaint, and all the reports on his conduct agree that in the modern sense of an old-fashioned word, he was a saint. For in everything he did, he served the greater community. Except for the war, till the day he retired, he worked in a factory and never got fired, but satisfied his employers, Fudge Motors, Inc. Yet he wasn't a scab or odd in his views, for his union reports that he paid his dues. Our report on his union showed it was sound, and our social psychology workers found that he was popular with his mates and liked to drink. The press are convinced that he bought a paper every day and that his reactions to advertisements were normal in every way. Policies taken out in his name prove that he was fully insured, and his health card shows that he was once in hospital, but he left it cured. Both Producers Research and High Grade Living declare he was fully sensible to the advantages of the installment plan and had everything necessary to the modern man: a phonograph, a radio, a car, and a Frigidaire. Our researchers into public opinion are content that he held the proper opinions for the time of the year. When there was peace, he was for peace. When there was war, he went. He was married and added 5 children to the population, which our eugenist says was the right number for a parent of his generation. And our teachers report that he never interfered with their education. Was he free? Was he happy? The question is absurd. Had anything been wrong, we should certainly have heard.
Song of the Devil, 1967. Ever since observation taught me temptation is a matter of timing, I've tried to clothe my fiction in up-to-date diction, the contemporary jargon of pride. I can recall when, to win the more obstinate round, the best bet was to say to them, "Sin the more, that grace may abound." Since social psychology replaced theology, the process goes twice as quick. If a conscience is tender and loath to surrender, I have only to whisper, "You're sick." Puritanical morality is madly non-you. Enhance your personality with a romance, with 2. If you pass up a dame, you've yourself to blame, for shame is neurotic, so snatch. All the rules are too formal. In fact, they're abnormal, for any desire is natch. So take your proper share, man, of dope and drink. Aren't you the chairman of Ego, Inc.? Free will is a mystical myth, as statistical methods have objectively shown. A fad of the churches. Since the latest researches into motivation, it's known that honor is hypocrisy, honesty a joke. You live in a democracy, lie like other folk. Since men are like goods, what are shouldn'ts or shoulds? when you are the leading brand. Let them all drop dead. You're way ahead. Beat them up if they dare to demand, what may your intention be, or what might ensue? There's a difference of dimension between the rest and you. If in the scrimmage of business your image should ever tarnish or stale, public relations can take it and make it shine like a knight of the Grail. You can mark up the price that you sell at if your package has glamour and show. Values are relative. Dough is dough. So let each, while you may think you're more okay, more yourself than anyone else, till you find that you're hooked, your goose is cooked, and you're only a cipher of hells. Believe while you can that I'm proud of you. Enjoy your dream. I'm so bored with the whole fucking crowd of you. I could scream.
Miss G, 1938. Let me tell you a little story about Miss Edith G. She lived in Clevedon Terrace at number 83. She'd a slight squint in her left eye. Her lips, they were thin and small. She had narrow, sloping shoulders, and she had no bust at all. She'd a velvet hat with trimmings and a dark grey serge costume. She lived in Clevedon Terrace in a small bed-sitting room. She'd a purple mat for wet days and green umbrella to take. She'd a bicycle with shopping basket and a harsh back pedal brake. The church of St. Aloysius was not so very far. She did a lot of knitting for the church bazaar. Miss G looked up at the starlight and said, "Does anyone care that I live on Clevedon Terrace on £100 a year?" She dreamed a dream one evening that she was the Queen of France and the Vicar of St. Aloysius asked Her Majesty to dance. But a storm blew down the palace. She was biking through a field of corn, and a bull with the face of the vicar was charging with lowered horn. She could feel his hot breath behind her. He was going to overtake, and the bicycle went slower and slower because of that back pedal brake. Summer made the trees a picture. Winter made them a wreck. She bicycled to the evening service with her clothes buttoned up to her neck. She passed by the loving couples. She turned her head away. She passed by the loving couples, and they didn't ask her to stay. Miss G sat in the side aisle. She heard the organ play, and the choir sang so sweetly at the ending of the day. Miss G knelt down in the side aisle. She knelt down on her knees. "Lead me not into temptation, but make me a good girl, please." The days and nights went by her like waves round a Cornish wreck. She bicycled down to the doctor with her clothes buttoned up to her neck. She bicycled down to the doctor and rang the surgery bell. "Oh, doctor, I've a pain inside me, and I don't feel very well." Dr. Thomas looked her over, and then he looked some more, walked over to his wash basin, said, "Why didn't you come before?" Dr. Thomas sat over his dinner, though his wife was waiting to ring, rolling his bread into pellets, said, "Cancer's a funny thing. Nobody knows what the cause is, though some pretend they do. It's like some hidden assassin waiting to strike at you. Childless women get it, and men when they retire. It's as if there had to be some outlet for their foiled creative fire." His wife, she rang for the servant, said, "Don't be so morbid, dear." He said, "I saw Miss G this evening, and she's a goner, I fear." They took Miss G to the hospital. She lay there a total wreck, lay in the ward for women, with her bedclothes right up to her neck. They laid her on the table. The students began to laugh, and Mr. Rose, the surgeon, he cut Miss G in half. Mr. Rose, he turned to his students, said, "Gentlemen, if you please, we seldom see a sarcoma as far advanced as this." They took her off the table. They wheeled away Miss G down to another department where they study anatomy. They hung her from the ceiling. Yes, they hung up Miss G. And a couple of Oxford groupers carefully dissected her knee.
Who's who? A shilling life will give you all the facts. How father beat him, how he ran away, what were the struggles of his youth, what acts made him the greatest figure of his day, of how he fought, fished, hunted, worked all night, though giddy climbed new mountains, named a sea. Some of the last researchers even write, love made him weep his pints like you and me. With all his honours on, he sighed for one who, say, astonished critics, lived at home, did little jobs about the house with skill and nothing else, could whistle, would sit still or potter around the garden, answered some of his long, marvelous letters, but kept none.
Lullaby, 1937. Lay your sleeping head, my love, human, on my faithless arm. Time and fevers burn away individual beauty from thoughtful children, and the grave proves the child ephemeral. But in my arms till break of day, let the living creature lie, mortal, guilty, but to me, the entirely beautiful. Soul and body have no bounds to lovers as they lie upon her tolerant, enchanted slope in their ordinary swoon. Grave the vision Venus sends of supernatural sympathy, universal love and hope, while an abstract insight wakes among the glaciers and the rocks, the hermit's carnal ecstasy. Certainty, fidelity on the stroke of midnight pass, like vibrations of a bell, and fashionable madmen raise their pedantic, boring cry. Every farthing of the cost, all the dreaded cards foretell, shall be paid. But from this night, not a whisper, not a thought, not a kiss, nor look be lost. Beauty, midnight, vision dies. Let the winds of dawn that blow softly round your dreaming head such a day of welcome show, eye and knocking heart may bless. Find the mortal world enough. Noons of dryness find you fed by the involuntary powers. Nights of insult let you pass, watched by every human love.
the night mail. This is the night mail crossing the border, bringing the check and the postal order. Letters for the rich, letters for the poor, the shop at the corner and the girl next door. Pulling up the attic, a steady climb. The gradient's against her, but she's on time. Through sparse counties she rampages, her driver's eye upon the gauges, panting up past lonely farms, fed by the fireman's restless arms, striding forward along the rails, through southern uplands and northern mails, winding up the valley to the watershed, through the heather and the weather and the dawn overhead, past cotton grass and the moorland boulder, shoveling white steam over her shoulder, snorting noisily as she passes silent miles of wind-bent grasses. Birds turn their heads as she approaches, stare from the bushes at her blank-faced coaches. Sheepdogs cannot turn her course, they slumber on with paws across. In the farm she passes, no one wakes, but a jug in the bedroom gently shakes. Dawn freshens, the climb is done. Down towards Glasgow she descends, towards the steam tugs yelping down the glade of cranes, towards the fields of apparatus, the furnaces. Set on the dark plain like gigantic chessmen, all Scotland waits for her. In the dark glens beside the pale green sea locks, men long for news. Letters of thanks, letters from banks, letters of joy from the girl and the boy, receipted bills and invitations to inspect new stock or visit relations, and applications for situations, and timid lovers' declarations, and gossip from all the nations, news circumstantial, news financial, letters with holiday snaps to enlarge in, letters with faces scrawled in the margin, letters from uncles, cousins and aunts, letters to Scotland from the south of France, letters of condolence to Highlands and Lowlands, notes from overseas to Hebrides written on paper of every hue, the pink, the violet, the white and the blue, the chatty, the catty, the boring, adoring, the cold and official, the heart's outpouring, clever, stupid, short and long, the typed and the printed and the spelt all wrong. Thousands are still asleep, dreaming of terrifying monsters, or of friendly tea beside the band at Cranston's or Crawford's, asleep in working Glasgow, asleep in well-set Edinburgh, asleep in granite Aberdeen. They continue their dreams and shall wake soon and long for letters. And none will hear the postman's knock without a quickening of the heart. For who can bear to feel himself forgotten?
In January 1939, before war was declared, Auden and his friend and sometimes lover, Christopher Isherwood, notoriously left England for America, a decision which overshadows his reputation to this day. Within months, he'd met the man who did indeed alter his life altogether. Auden's deep love for Chester Calman, the wrong blonde, so named because Auden, who was expecting another male guest when Chester turned up at his hotel room, exclaimed, "But it's the wrong blonde." But that love lasted on its own terms, mostly Chester's, for the rest of his life. Auden wrote, "The triple situation of being sexually jealous like a wife, anxious like a nanny, and competitive like a brother is not easy for my kind of temperament. Still, it's my bed and I must lie in it." He knew what he was talking about when he wrote, "If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me." Even in the gladiatorial arena of love and sex, an arena in human life in which self-deception often rules, Auden remains clear-sighted. "My dominant characteristics," he once said, "are intellect and intuition. My weak ones, feeling and sensation." Not quite true, for he wrote beautiful, haunting love poems. This duality in Auden's work is mirrored in his life. He was an Anglo-Catholic communist who volunteered to fight in the Spanish Civil War, yet, as we said, he left England in 1939. Although a hugely disorganized man, often taking to wearing his socks on his head, he kept monastically disciplined hours. Auden married Thomas Mann's daughter Erica, who had been declared an enemy of the Nazi state. Marriage to our poet provided her with a passport, though they never lived together. Of women, he said, "Physically, I just can't see the attraction. It's like watching cricket for the first time." An independent man, he nevertheless, even in his 40s, feared loneliness, and he was right. Over the years, Auden increasingly grew tired and sad by the winters, and he finally approached his old college, Christchurch, to see if they'd give him rooms in his declining years. In 1972, he accepted the offer of a little cottage in their grounds, for which he paid a small rent. He'd aged dramatically. He would sigh, "My face looks like a wedding cake left out in the rain." Henry Moore spoke of its monumental ruggedness, its deep furrows like plough marks crossing a field. But that face had its own sad beauty. Auden sensed the future. "I shall," he wrote, "probably die alone at midnight in a hotel to the great annoyance of the management." And he did. Just that. In the Altenburgerhof in Vienna on the 28th of September 1973, Auden died of a heart attack, which he'd once told his biographer, Charles Osborne, was the nicest way to go. It's cheap and it's quick. He was definitely alone. The reaction of the management is not recorded. He was buried in his beloved Kirchstetten, and a memorial stone in Poets' Corner was unveiled by John Betjeman in October 1974. Auden once movingly described the arts as a way of breaking bread with the dead, which, in a sense, is what we're doing here this evening. He also passionately believed that no poem which is not better read aloud is good poetry. So I hope he'd be happy with the final selection. The witty and loving, "Oh, Tell Me the Truth About Love," the naughty, "The Love Feast," the wise and haunting, "If I Could Tell You," and, of course, "Funeral Blues." We then acquire a glimpse into Auden's softer side with "Leap Before You Look," followed by the more loving one with its Shakespearean notes. When Auden and Isherwood disembarked in New York in 1939 after their freezing crossing, they were informed of the death of Yeats, thus inspiring the irrefutable masterpiece In Memory of W.B. Yeats. And we finish with the stage manager to the critics, the preface to The Sea and the Mirror, Auden's wonderful tribute to The Tempest's marvelous lines, "Oh, what authority gives existence its surprise." If only we knew. But first, "Oh, tell me the truth about love."
Some say that love's a little boy, and some say it's a bird. Some say it makes the world go round, and some say that's absurd. And when I asked the man next door, who looked as if he knew, his wife got very cross indeed and said it wouldn't do. Does it look like a pair of pajamas? Or the ham in a temperance hotel? Does its odour remind one of llamas, or has it a comforting smell? Is it prickly to touch as a hedge is, or soft as eiderdown fluff? Is it sharp or quite smooth at the edges? Oh, tell me the truth about love. Our history books refer to it in cryptic little notes. It's quite a common topic on the transatlantic boats. I've found the subject mentioned in accounts of suicides and even seen it scribbled on the backs of railway guides. Does it howl like a hungry Alsatian or boom like a military band? Could one give a first-rate imitation on a saw or a Steinway grand? Is its singing at parties a riot? Does it only like classical stuff? Will it stop when one wants to be quiet? Oh, tell me the truth about love. I looked inside the summer house, it wasn't ever there. I tried the Thames at Maidenhead and Brighton's bracing air. I don't know what the blackbird sang or what the tulip said, but it wasn't in the chicken run or underneath the bed. Can it pull extraordinary faces? Is it usually sick on a swing? Does it spend all its time at the races or fiddling with pieces of string? Has it views of its own about money? Does it think patriotism enough? Are its stories vulgar but funny? Oh, tell me the truth about love. When it comes, will it come without warning, just as I'm picking my nose? Will it knock on my door in the morning or tread in the bus on my toes? Will it come like a change in the weather? Will its greeting be courteous or rough? Will it alter my life altogether? Oh, tell me the truth about love.
The Love Feast. In an upper room at midnight, sea is gathered on behalf of love, according to the gospel of the radio phonograph. Lou is telling Anne what Molly said to Mark behind her back. Jack likes Jill, who worships George, who has the hots for Jack. Catechumens make their entrance. Steep, enthusiastic eyes flicker after tits and baskets. Someone vomits. Someone cries. Willie cannot bear his father. Lillian is afraid of kids. The love that rules the sun and stars permits what he forbids. Adrian's pleasure-loving dachshund in a sinner's lap lies curled. Drunken, absent-minded fingers pat a sinless world. Who is Jenny lying to in her call collect to Rome? That love, the love that made her out of nothing, tells me to go home. But that missed number in the corner, playing hard to get. I am sorry, I'm not sorry. Make me trace, Lord, but not yet.
If I could tell you, time will say nothing but I told you so. Time only knows the price we have to pay. If I could tell you, I would let you know. If we should weep when clowns put on their show, if we should stumble when musicians play, time will say nothing but I told you so. There are no fortunes to be told, although because I love you more than I can say, if I could tell you, I would let you know. The winds must come from somewhere when they blow. There must be reasons why the leaves decay. Time will say nothing, but I told you so. Perhaps the roses really want to grow. The vision seriously intends to stay. If I could tell you, I would let you know. Suppose the lions all get up and go, and all the brooks and soldiers run away. Will time say nothing, but I told you so? If I could tell you, I would let you know.
The more loving one. Looking up at the stars, I know quite well that for all they care, I can go to hell. But on earth, indifference is the least we have to dread from man or beast. How should we like it were stars to burn with a passion for us we could not return? If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. Admirer, as I think I am, of stars that do not give a damn, I cannot, now I see them, say, I missed one terribly all day. Were all stars to disappear or die, I should learn to look at an empty sky and feel its total dark sublime. Oh, this might take me a little time.
Leap before you look. The sense of danger must not disappear. The way is certainly both short and steep, however gradual it looks from here. Look if you like, but you will have to leap. Tough-minded men get mushy in their sleep and break the bylaws any fool can keep. It is not the convention, but the fear that has a tendency to disappear. The worried efforts of the busy heap, the dirt, the imprecision, and the beer produce a few smart wisecracks every year. Laugh if you can, but you will have to leap. The clothes that are considered right to wear will not be either sensible or cheap, so long as we consent to live like sheep and never mention those who disappear. Much can be said for social savoir-faire, but to rejoice when no one else is there is even harder than it is to weep. No one is watching, but you have to leap. A solitude 10,000 fathoms deep sustains the bed on which we lie, my dear. Although I love you, you will have to leap. Our dream of safety has to disappear.
Funeral blues. Stop all the clocks. Cut off the telephone. Prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone. Silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin. Let the mourners come. Let aeroplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. Put crepe bows round the white necks of the public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the woods. For nothing now can ever come to any good.
In memory of W.E. Yeats, he disappeared in the dead of winter. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted. The snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. What instruments we have agree. The day of his death was a dark, cold day. Far from his illness, the wolves ran on through the evergreen forests. The peasant river was untempted by the fashionable quays. By mourning tongues, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. But for him, it was his last afternoon as himself, an afternoon of nurses and rumors. The provinces of his body revolted. The squares of his mind were empty. Silence invaded the suburbs. The current of his feeling failed. He became his admirers. Now he is scattered among 100 cities and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections, to find his happiness in another kind of wood and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. The words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. But in the importance and noise of tomorrow, when the brokers are roaring like beasts on the floor of the bourse, and the poor have the sufferings to which they are fairly accustomed, and each in the cell of himself is almost convinced of his freedom, a few will think of this day as one thinks of a day when one did something slightly unusual. What instruments we have agree, the day of his death was a dark, cold day. You were silly, like us. Your gift survived it all. The parish of rich women, physical decay, yourself. Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. Now Ireland has her madness and her weather still, for poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its saying, where executives would never want to tamper, flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs. Raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives. A way of happening. A mouth. Earth receive an honored guest. William Yeats is laid to rest. Let the Irish vessel lie emptied of its poetry. In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. Intellectual disgrace stares from every human face, and the seas of pity lie locked and frozen in each eye. Follow, poet, follow right to the bottom of the night with your unconstraining voice. Still persuade us to rejoice. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse. Sing of human unsuccess in a rapture of distress. In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountain start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise.
Preface to The Sea and the Mirror, which Auden wrote in 1944. The aged catch their breath, for the nonchalant couple go waltzing across the tightrope as if there were no death or hope of falling down. The wounded cry as the clown doubles his meaning, and oh, how the dear little children laugh when the drums roll and the lovely lady is sawn in half. Oh, what authority gives existence its surprise? Science is happy to answer that the ghosts who haunt our lives are handy with mirrors and wire, that song and sugar and fire, courage and come hither eyes have a genius for taking pains. But how does one think up a habit? Our wonder, our terror remains. Art opens the fishiest eye to the flesh and the devil who heats the chamber of temptation where heroes roar and die. We are wet with sympathy now, thanks for the evening. But how shall we satisfy when we meet between shall I and I will, the lion's mouth whose hunger no metaphors can fill? Well, who in his own backyard has not opened his heart to the smiling secret he cannot quote? Which goes to show that the bard was sober when he wrote that this world of fact we love is unsubstantial stuff. All the rest is silence on the other side of the wall, and the silence, ripeness, and the ripeness, all.
What? It's the slowest entrance point. The build-up.
Good evening, everyone. I am Maurice Saatchi. Use the mic. I am Maurice Saatchi, the lover of the deceased Josephine Hart, And I'm going to make a little presentation to Dame Eileen Atkins in a second. And this is a wonderful thing for me to be able to do, Eileen, because as many of you may know, the Josephine Hart Poetry Hour started in a little art gallery in Cork Street. Some of our best friends are here in the audience and have been tremendous followers ever since. And then it was suggested to Josephine that this poetry hour was so good that it could appear in Shaftesbury Avenue, in one of the great theatres in London, which she thought was impossible, but Let Us Go Then, You and I, which was an Eliot evening with Eileen, Edward Fox and Michael Gough, and somehow or other the Lyric Theatre in Shaftesbury Avenue was packed for a week. And then at the end of that, somebody said, well, this is all so wonderful, the right place for it is the British Library. And before I do this, I would like, if I may, aside from all our friends and all of you in the audience, can I thank, would you help me to thank John Fawcett from the library and Monique Henry, who works for us, who has put all this together for so many years. I think Siobhan said at the beginning, and you're all aware of it, that after Josephine Hart's death, nobody knew at all what would happen after that. Nobody knew whether you would all come. Nobody knew whether the actors would come. Nobody knew whether the library would be interested in going on when Josephine Hart wasn't here. But it all happened. And of course, it happened because of you, and because you are responsible for what's in here. This is a cheque for, I think it's £7,700, which I'm going to give to Dame Eileen, who is a member of the committee of the King George V Fund for Actors, because not all actors, as all these great actors know, are as rich and famous as the actors on the stage. And some actors do really struggle, and this wonderful charity will now, I hope, receive this on Josephine's behalf, and thank you all for making this happen. Dame Eileen.
Thank you.